It's Monday, June 8th, and I'm looking over some fields to kind of check and figure out if, how soon, and what I'm going to spray. So this is the first field of corn that I sprayed, and just kind of walking down the indrows here to see. It looks like we've got some little grass coming. Don't see much broadleaf stuff there. Ooh, that's grass too, I guess. There's a little bit of broadleaf. That almost looks like it got burned back and lived. There's some morning glory. Another morning glory. Another slightly larger morning glory. So, may try to get over here sooner than later. It's fairly windy, or it was windy today. Maybe it's going to calm down some this evening, so I was looking at possibly trying to spray a load tonight, and then maybe doing some tomorrow, depending on kind of what the weather conditions are then, because it shouldn't be too windy, but there is a chance of rain. Hopefully it won't amount to too much, but I'm not exactly sure. Also need to get a little bit more herbicide, which might require a field trip depending on where I get it from, I guess. But kind of looking things over and seeing what we have to work with exactly. Usually, most fields, the biggest weed pressure will be on the edges, where you have grass or fence line or ditch, road ditch, is kind of where a lot of weed seeds will work their way into the field. So that's usually kind of the first place to look to see if things are coming up. Which there's not anything very big, and I haven't seen anything yet that looks like water hemp, which is good. Some more little grass. Seems like mostly little grass and morning glories. But if it looks like it makes sense to spray this, getting it sprayed ahead of the rain would be good, because then that will, the rain will wash the pre-emerge herbicide into the soil to help prevent future weed seeds from germinating. And also potentially with some small weeds, you get what's called reach back, which essentially the herbicide can be taken into the weed plant either through the soil or through contact with the foliage above the ground. So like you kind of can kill them both from getting them on the leaves that are out, and also if it's a weed that's underneath some residue or something like that. There's a water hemp right there. That say it's covered up so the weed that's growing doesn't get herbicide on it. You can, with some herbicide, still kill that by the seedling taking up the herbicide through the soil, as well as suppressing growth of new weed seeds. So there's nothing too dirty here. The corn's definitely taken off good now that it's finally warmed up and the sun's shining. It's definitely grown significantly in the last week. But the risk is, if I don't spray soon, I'm going to do more damage driving through it, and also potentially will be pushing the limits on the herbicide labels as far as herbicides. Probably going to try to do what I can as soon as I can on the stuff that I am going to put a second pass on the corn. And some of the stuff that I sprayed later, we'll take a look at and see if there's any weeds coming there. There's some stuff that I didn't necessarily plan to one pass, but depending on how things play out, if it's still clean and the corn's growing fast enough, I might roll the dice and see if I can get by with what I put down, since I sprayed the first pass kind of late on some of it. And across the road at an earlier bean field, beans are definitely growing pretty good also. Got a couple trifoliates out. Looks like on most of them, starting on the third trifoliate. I think I had made a comment in one of the previous videos, but driving by today, it's even more obvious that the soybeans that I planted before I sprayed the rye to kill it, I have a lot more rye that's still alive, whereas it looks like I got a pretty clean kill on the stuff that I sprayed before I planted it. Which I kind of thought that that's what it looked like was going to happen. Not super excited about it, but I don't think, I mean, there's definitely some out here, but they're pretty spindly, weak-looking plants, and they may set seed, but they don't look like they're particularly vigorous. So I think I'm probably just going to spray them when I would spray them based on other weeds, and we'll run a little bit, maybe extra clethodim, to be able to make sure that I get the rye killed, which I don't know, probably isn't even necessary. But I think I'm going to base when I spray more on the weed situation than the rye situation, because it's going to be more important to yield to spray late and be able to keep the weeds down as the soybeans get bigger than that this is going to affect anything significantly in a negative fashion. It also looks like there's not really any broadleaves coming up out here yet, which is good. That means the residual that I sprayed before the soybeans came up is doing what it was supposed to. I saw a little bit of grass, a couple spots. There's some volunteer corn out here, but I don't see any water hemp or really any other broadleaves anywhere that I've looked so far, which is good because it's been more than a month since this was sprayed, I'm pretty sure, because I think it was the end of April when I planted and sprayed all of the bean ground. So overall, a little bit perturbed by the existence of this undead rye, but I kind of knew that was a risk at the time, I guess. So we got some little grass coming, but that won't be a big deal to get killed. Usually grass isn't very hard to kill, it's more the broadleaves, as long as the grass isn't really big, I should say. So I think at this point I don't think there's a lot of urgency on the soybeans, but probably want to get rolling on the corn sooner than later. The other thing I wanted to check was to see if the weeds died where I got rained out a week and a half ago when I was spraying. Which it looks like the end rows, at least, everything is very brown and crispy, which is good news. Might be some grass there that didn't totally get nuked, but doesn't look too bad for the most part. I'm going to walk out here a ways, because probably the last that I sprayed would be the most apt to not have died. So right now I'm in some that I sprayed after it rained, so you can see that everything here is nice and crispy, or getting crispy at least. There's still some stems that aren't totally brown, but not much green foliage at least. However, if I go up this way a little bit, there are some spots where I have green leaves on broadleaves. And it seems like most stuff is pretty dead. So like, you got one here that we've still got some green on. It looks pretty sickly, so it might go ahead and die. These are mare's tail, I believe. Also not completely dead, but the corn will grow pretty fast at this point, so as long as we can suppress the weeds, the corn will probably outcompete it for the most part. So I don't see anything that looks like it's going to be a complete disaster, although I wish it was a little bit more dead than it was, because that would make it easier to decide not to spray it again. We got some like this, that's like a water hemp probably. The stem feels pretty, not real rubbery, but it's not great. But like this guy is still pretty green. Probably he's not going to die. And most likely when it was sprayed, it was not nearly as big as it is now, would be my guess, because I don't know that there was anything that big out here when I sprayed this, or I didn't think there was really. So I need to decide exactly what I'm going to do about that. It seems like maybe the bigger problem is that there's some grass that didn't die. and stuff like that, there's maybe a better chance that it can stay alive down underneath the corn and then sort of go ahead and set on seeds after the corn matures and there's more light down between the rows. Yeah, there's definitely some there. I think I'm going to have to at least respray a little bit out here in the middle. I don't know that I'm going to have to respray all of it, but I'm a little concerned that if I don't, I'm going to have some weeds out here that are going to be alive and potentially got a dose of some herbicide that I don't want them to be resistant to. So probably going to try to figure out exactly what the game plan is, but hopefully come back with something at least in a few spots here. Well, I decided to spray off a load tonight, but I was afraid if I did one of the fields that wasn't decent running that I was going to end up not being able to finish before dark and then not being able to see what I was doing. So I'm getting a second pass put on the area at the home farm here where we have some cucumber issues, to try to get as much residual as possible to keep those down. Probably won't be able to suppress the ones that germinate in August, but if we can keep the ones from germinating in June and July, hopefully at least they'll be small and won't set as many seeds. And since this is a half-mile field, I can head straight rows. I should be able to get this sprayed off before it gets dark, hopefully without too much trouble, but it is about 10 after 8 right now, and I'm 15 acres or a little less than that in, so probably not anything too interesting to take videos of because we're just going to be driving back and forth across the field, but getting something done anyway. Well, I got this load sprayed off before it got dark, but not by very much. I'm not sure if there was a front that came through or what exactly happened, but it was not windy for a while, and then it seemed like it got windy again for a little bit in the middle there. Trying to hold up the booms as I hold the camera with the other hand and talk coherently is challenging. Fortunately, I'm a talented individual. Let's see what happens with the weather and what tomorrow brings. Yeah, it's Tuesday morning, closing in on noon actually. And so far, the weather forecast basically could not have been more wrong, which is good for me, I guess. It was supposed to rain this morning, and it hasn't rained a drop, and it was supposed to get windy, and right now, at least, it's pretty much perfectly still. The windmills in the neighborhood, there's one over here that's turning, but the other two, there's 2 or 3 over this way that aren't. I haven't actually checked the forecast real lately, but it seems like basically the rain was going to come from what's left of the tropical storm, I think, and right now it's kind of spinning east of here. So far, I've been able to do some spraying in pretty decent conditions, and I think I might be able to get finished with corn today. We'll see kind of how things go, but that's the goal anyway. Got finished up and running some straight water out the boom. So I was going to take a quick video here kind of showing the tips. I'm getting ready to switch from the air injection nozzles to the dual fans that we use with Liberty. So you can tell, even though there's quite a bit of breeze, these are pretty large droplets, and stuff is, I mean, you can see the droplets carrying some, but we're also pretty high, and the majority of this stuff is going pretty straight down. The pattern, it's kind of spattery. I don't know if you can hear it on the video or not, but it's basically making droplets with air in the middle is kind of the idea, so that you have less drift risk. And you can tell, I mean, we're 4 feet up on this end, but if you look farther over in the center there where it's closer to the grass, there's pretty much no drift coming off that, or very, very little at least. So I'm gonna finish kind of flushing this out with water and then switch to the other tips, and I've got to do some recalibration because they're a different size or different rate. The Liberty tips, which are a dual fan, so there's one fan that goes forward and one fan that goes back. For spraying contact herbicides where you're trying to coat the entire plant as well as possible. As you can see, we're getting a lot more fines, and that's sort of one of the downsides of having to use or using that type of herbicide, is that you do end up with more fine droplets to get the medium droplets that you want. And then you are a lot more susceptible to drift. Like I said, this is just water, so nothing bad is going to happen with it sitting here, but kind of have to pick the days or pick the wind direction, try to pick the wind direction when we're spraying beans. It's about 8 o'clock and had a pretty productive day. Got done spraying corn. Got the sprayer cleaned up. I did end up respraying the stuff that got rained on a week ago, 10 days ago, whatever that was. I decided there was enough stuff there that looked like it might still be alive, that for $5 an acre, plus or minus a little bit, that I was going to have in hitting it again, that I would a lot rather spend that money and hopefully have the stuff dead, since it was only 20 acres anyway. So maybe $100 mistake spraying that day that it rained, but thought rather have a $100 mistake than a $1,000 mistake or several $1,000 mistake. And got the sprayer cleaned up, so should be more or less ready to go for soybeans. I am not seeing too many weeds in the beans yet, so I think I'm going to hold off on spraying them maybe until next week or so. But pretty productive day. The last thing that I'm going to do, I think, is sprinkle some beans on the ground, because my outside row of corn doesn't go all the way out, and I'm pretty sure when I sprayed this the wind was out of the north or the south. I think out of the south, but there must have been a eastwardly component, or it was strong enough that it carried stuff forward and moved off target, because I seem to killed a couple rows of beans. So since I think it's supposed to rain tonight, the last I knew it was about 3/4 of an inch, I think was what's predicted. I'm going to sprinkle a few of the leftover soybeans out here. I briefly contemplated if it might be worth trying to load up one hopper on the bean planter, but I don't know that I really have enough to go very far with both, and I think if I load up one, then I'm going to really tear up the other half. So I think I'm just going to sprinkle some stuff out here and cross my fingers and pray that we can have at least a few of them grow, so that there's not a giant 6-foot wide dead strip here. It's not that bad, but I think I killed at least 3 rows, which would be 45 inches, in a few spots there. So going to sprinkle a few, and maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not as bad over the hill. I just kind of noticed this when I was looking for weeds this afternoon. So I'm going to sprinkle a few beans out here and see if any of them germinate.